Hello people and welcome back to another reading by Skeptic Media, and we're going to continue the chapter Brune Boyne. But before I do, I just want to say get well soon to one of my listeners, Colette, who's in hospital right now, and she's probably listening, so I just want to say get well soon, Colette, and I hope you get a speedy recovery and get out of that hospital. Anyway people, without further ado, I'll continue this chapter. 1096, Constantinople. It was there that the bases were formed that would come to Jerusalem. 22 years later, in 1118, the Order of the Temple, under the double investiture given to those of these initiates, Hugh de Paynes, Geoffroy de Saint Omer, the secret investiture of the Patriarch Theophilus, 67th successor of the Apostle John, and then the public investiture of the Patriarch Garamond, representing the official world. In 1127 the order was to take its flight, protected by the great initiative Saint Bernard. 9 years were to run by before the meeting in Constantinople. 2 times 11 years passed before the first bases were established in Jerusalem, and again 9 years were necessary before the work, properly speaking, could commence. Meditate one day on the symbolism of these numbers. It will be a revelation for you. The public history of the Order of the Temple you already know in its essentials. I will presently clear up a few of its secret aspects. Before all, allow your soul to understand. The Order, born in 1118, a number whose theosophical addition is 11, 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 8 equals 11, died in 1314. For it is the last breath of the Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, that the complete mission for a second time withdrew, as it had retired with Amenhotep the sixth. I send you back once again to the sacred study of the numbers, which were so important to the initiatives of the temple. Indeed, the numbers are more of a revelation than Frater Bernard could ever have imagined when he wrote this. Since today, these two important Templar numerals take on ominous significance when we connect them to world events. These numbers have been synonymous with the Templars throughout their history. An interesting exercise would be to look at the many watersheds in world history where the theosophical dates add up to 11, or multiples of 11, especially 22 and 33. From Remembrance Day for the 2 world wars, 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, to the assassination of J.F. Kennedy, 22nd day of the 11th month. And of course, the infamous attack on the Twin Towers. The towers look like this, 11 or 11, on 11th of September, 9/11 in American jargon. The Berlin Wall fell on 11th of September, heralding the end of communism. According to investigative reporter, author David Yallop, Pope John Paul I, the Smiling Pope, was murdered on the 33rd day of his reign on the throne of Peter. Let's not forget that Jesus was crucified in his 33rd year, or that the highest degree in the Masonic order is 33. It seems the higher the multiples of 11, the more important the event. As we continue, we will see the significant dates, numbers throughout our story. Another piece of the puzzle slots into our picture because 11 is also a significant number in the Orange Order. For example, each year, the night of the 11th of July is the time that bonfires are lit to celebrate William's victory, and also because of some anomalies about dates over the years. The battle took place on the 11th of July according to the then Gregorian calendar, July the 1st according to the old style Julian calendar. The explanation for this is 1690. There was only 10 days difference between the old style Julian and the new style Georgian calendars. Britain and Ireland had not yet adopted the Georgian calendar. When it was finally adopted in Britain, there were then 11 days difference between the old calendar and the new calendar, which meant that the actual date of the battle, by today's reckoning, is the 12th of July. Finally, there are 11 degrees within the Black Preceptory, colloquially known as the poor man's Masons, and at other times Super Orange Men. They are the highest set of degrees an Orangeman can attain. From a more mythological point of view, 11 sages left Atlantis, Boyne, to travel to Egypt. Bernard tells us that the 11 left Atlantis for Egypt, where the Sphinx was to symbolize forever the world that the eternal wisdom had taken shape for humanity, and the 11 in the land of Egypt did not experience any difficulty in convincing the Pharaoh of that time. So much less this Pharaoh was of a lineage of which the world would say predestined, and who for decades had prepared for the coming of wisdom, and the 11 became 12, the 12 who are the source of all sacred science. Note, remember 11 kings left Scotland, led by Henry de Sinclair, to travel to the same region. Before we leave this excursion into the significance of the numbers 9 and 11, it will be of interest to know about an event that happened near Boyne in the year 1649 CE. Oliver Cromwell laid siege to Drogheda, and on the 11th of September his army breached the walls in the early afternoon, which would have been about 9 AM New York time, and history reports slaughtered about 3,000 of the inhabitants. Just another coincidence? Further research reveals other potential reasons for the Stuart clan being at Boyne. It was possible they were, being of the same tradition as the Templars, looked for historical artefacts important to their family, or was it lost esoteric knowledge that they were seeking? Then again, they might have been simply reclaiming their Mecca, in the same way they had reclaimed, albeit for a relative short period, about 100 years, Jerusalem with their crusades almost 700 years earlier. Did they discover something on their adventures to the Holy Land that directed them to Ireland? We find a correspondence with these random thoughts in Ralph Ellis's book Jesus, Last of the Pharaohs. Keep in mind, Ralph had not yet identified the ritual. The monuments of Britain must have also had an equal mystery about them. Both the Greeks and the Jewish historians Josephus mention the mysteries of Britain. If all this had been known to the royal family, Newgrange would have been an auspicious place to stage a final battle for power. Additionally, if a rumour had spread as to the condition of Newgrange, the family may have sensed a chance of staging a new crusade, this time to Ireland, not Palestine. The purpose of this Irish crusade would have been the same as the medieval crusaders in Jerusalem, to dig in the ruins of Newgrange and uncover more artefacts for the sacred family to treasure. This may seem like wild speculation, but it is exactly what happened. William of Orange won the day. James retreated to France. The Bourbons had lost their opportunity, but what did William actually win? Was Newgrange the prize? There are a couple of points in this extract that are worth clarifying. The first one is the phrase, if all this had been known to the royal family. Remember, Newgrange was not discovered until 1699. There is an interesting anecdote about this, relayed to me by one of the knowledgeable guides at the Obelisk Centre, which, while not really clarifying this statement, is an interesting aside. The story goes something like this. A soldier under Meinhard Schomburg's command, which shows that even the rank and file might have known the significance of where they were, while standing atop the undiscovered Newgrange mound prior to crossing the Boyne, declared, "Gentlemen, today we stand on something of grave importance." This does not sound to me like Prussian humour, so perhaps he became infected with a sense of Irish irony. The second point to reconsider is the question, what did William actually win? Was it freedom from Rome to worship as your conscience dictated, as the Orange Order maintained, or was it a victory for the mystery schools in their ancient war against tyranny? Whatever it was, it seems to have been lost again according to the enigmatic Orange song penned circa 1830 CE. For oh, 'tis lost what William won that day at the Boyne Water. While the picture that solves this fascinating mystery continues to grow, we notice parallels between Boyne, the necropolis at Giza, and the ancient lands where the houses of Israel and Judah supposedly dwelt. It is worth pointing out that, like Giza, there are 3 early pyramid-type structures at Boyne and evidence of pyramid-shaped sand and stones. These have long since been removed. Possibly they presented too obvious a clue of the Irish connections with Egypt. Antiquarian Thomas Pownall insisted Newgrange was originally pyramid-shaped and the triangular segment had been removed from the front of the entrance. Important to our tale, he also believed, although O'Kelly disagrees, that Newgrange was but a ruin of what it had been. This piece fits in later. Also like Gaza, the Boyne structures are arranged according to solar and stellar astronomy. This points us towards the conclusion that the histories of the two seemingly different races are in reality one long continuous story of a lost race and their accomplishments. Newgrange is known in Irish as Ume na Grain, Cave of the Sun, an appropriate name given that the entrance passage is a so-called roof box built to receive the rays of the rising sun at the winter solstice around the 22nd of December. The roof box was ingeniously designed to take into account the slight movement of the earth in relation to the sun over eons of time, and according to Professor O'Kelly, will continue to do so as long as Newgrange continues to stand. The length of time it takes for the sun's rays to enter and retreat from the chamber is approximately 17 to 22 minutes and occurs on at least 3 consecutive days. Within the chamber there is an unexplained basin. In fact, there are 3 basins, but this is the one that gave me the initial clue, that now rests in the eastern recess of the chamber. In the early history of Newgrange, it was situated, or was temporarily positioned during the winter solstice, as was the plain basin in the western recess on the floor, where it could catch the incoming rays of the sun. This reveals one of my unique discoveries about Newgrange. That is, these supposed basins are not basins at all, but perfect models of a human egg showing different stages of the fertility cycle. If viewed from the side, 2 of these basins look suspiciously like corpuscles. The nuclei that appear when the sperm first breaches the human egg are quite clearly and accurately recreated on the eastern basin. See illustrations. An added attraction of Boyne is the very high quality of its knowledgeable guides, but not one of them could advance any other interpretation of these unusual indentations. When asked what these markings are, the answer invariably is, "Your guess is as good as mine." Well, actually, mine is better. The passage or birth canal that leads into the chamber womb reinforces the feasibility of my speculations, although Newgrange is significant for other profound reasons that we'll get to later. There is a strange anomaly about this passageway, because standing at the entrance and looking inside it is impossible to see the chamber womb because of its irregular shape. It is as if the passage itself is imitating the action of a sperm as it races towards the egg. But if looked into from the ground level, you would see it is perfectly straight, which has to be to give the sun's rays sperm entrance to the chamber womb. Some of these clues we have examined so far may seem trivial at first glance, but taken in context, they demonstrate that no matter what else Newgrange represents, it can convincingly be viewed as a virtual model of a womb and a fertility monument, as we will discover. Another interesting anecdote about this basin relates that there were 2 crystals embedded in the hollows, or in the nuclei. If we free our imagination for a moment, we will be able to observe the sun's rays striking the crystals during the winter solstice ritual and bathe the womb in myriad hues of colour. This kaleidoscope of colour would have marked the precise moment when the miraculous process, that is the introduction of the light of consciousness or the consciousness of the universe into the world, began. We can only guess at what emotions must have been felt by anyone witnessing this awe-inspiring ritual. To strengthen my theory of Newgrange as a virtual model of a womb, let's eavesdrop on a conversation between 2 modern-day sages, Christopher Knight and Robert Lomas, as they discuss the Newgrange megalith. "You realise what this triple spiral symbol means, don't you?" said Robert. "No, but it must mean something very important indeed," Chris replied. "One spiral is drawn by the sun every 3 months, so 3 spirals must equal 9 months, and 9 months is the human gestation period, so it looks as though your resurrection theory might be right. This was a birthing chamber. One of the reasons the ancients crafted this amazing construction was to demonstrate how the dramatic act of universal creation manifested the laws of the cosmic in nature. But Newgrange had a more ancient purpose that has been hinted at, but has yet to surface. Continuing our exploratory investigations of this ancient campus, we discovered genetics was not the only advanced knowledge they possessed. Having made some bizarre discoveries on our journey so far, it won't surprise us to learn that the curriculum also included biology, physics and astronomy. Evidence for this has been found by modern scientists, which at the same time debunks the notion that this centre of learning was a necropolis that focused on death. Dr. Philip Stooke of the University of Western Ontario, whose research interests are planetary geology and the history of planetary cartography, discovered that the ancient peoples who resided at the bend of the Boyne knew how to make a detailed map of the surface of the moon. He suggests that when the light of the full moon falls on a particular stone in North Cairn, there is reflected a 5,000-year-old map of the surface of the moon. In his pamphlet, Neolithic Lunar Maps at North and Baltinglass, Ireland, Journey for the History of Astronomy, Dr. Stooke reports, on March the 17th, 1980, Martin Brennan and Jack Roberts saw a beam of light from the rising sun illuminate a carved stone at the back end of the rock-lined passage in the great mound called Cairn T at Loughcrew, County Meath. 2 weeks later, on the evening of the 1st of April, Brennan and his colleagues watched the rising moon from the same spot. As the moon appeared over the horizon, a shaft of light was projected along the passage and onto the same carved stone. The great passage mound of Knowth, also in Meath, contains 2 rock-lined passages, one facing east, the other west. Brennan observed the setting sun shine into the western passage on September 13th, 1980. Attempting to observe sunrise on the following day, he found that trees and the current level of the ground would block the view of the rising sun from the eastern passage. Nevertheless, it seemed likely that the eastern passage was also originally intended to be penetrated by light from the rising sun. Brennan's experience, describing in his 1983 book The Stars and the Stones, suggested that these Irish Neolithic sites might have had some connection with the moon as well as the sun. I have identified another connection previously overlooked by Brennan and others working at Knowth. If moonlight were to shine on the backstone of the eastern passage at Knowth, it would illuminate a map of the moon itself, the world's oldest known depiction of the lunar Maria. George Ogan, who excavated Knowth in the 1960s, called the carved stone, which forms the end wall of the eastern passage, Orthostat 47. The design has 3 sections, superficially similar but orientated differently. The right-hand section appears to be nothing less than a map of the lunar Maria, as becomes clear when it's compared with a naked eye map of the moon. At least a dozen points of correspondence are immediately obvious. The scientific community laid the foundations for the 7 sciences of the trivium and quadrivium of the medieval universities. This is the knowledge James I allegedly brought to England in the form of Masonic teachings when he became the first Stuart king of the United Kingdom of Britain and Ireland in 1603. One can still see numerous examples of the knowledge left by these mysterious people, carved in stone at the abandoned Brú na Boinne Awan site. The few survivors of this race, perhaps because of their precognitive knowledge, shielded themselves from the worst of the catastrophe that overtook their race and set out on their epic cyclic exodus. Seeking warmth and security in a desolate world that was now experiencing a nuclear winter, they journeyed south looking for the Saviour, the giver of light and life, the Son of God. They scanned the dark skies to no avail, but they knew this was where the Son of God would be born in all his glory. The later people we call Egyptians adopted these notions and called their Son of God Horus, son of Osiris. When he was on the horizon, Horus rising, he was known as the rising Horus, and at midday he was known as the Most High Osiris, and in the evening Set, as in sunset. Being great sages, and in order to protect the memory of their race following the catastrophe that passed over them, they preserved their teachings by recording them in stone and cryptic drama for later generations to rediscover. Some of their secrets they buried and some they would hide in the open, trusting that people who came after them would one day decipher the mythological and symbolic teachings. Freemasonic teachings largely concur with these claims in the ancient historical records. The great Masonic legend of Enoch. This myth describes how Enoch built an underground temple. The legend goes on to inform us that after Enoch had completed the subterranean temple, fearing that the principles of those arts and sciences which he had cultivated with so much assiduity would be lost in the general destruction of which he had received prophetic vision, he erected 2 pillars, the one of marble to withstand the influence of fire and the other of brass to resist the action of water. On the pillar of brass he engraved the history of the creation, the principle of the arts and sciences, and the doctrine of the speculative Freemasonry, as they were practised in his times, and on the one of marble he inscribed characters and hieroglyphs, importing that near the spot where they stood a precious treasure was deposited in a subterranean vault. Josephus gives an account of these pillars in the first book of his Antiquities. He ascribes them to the children of Seth, which is by no means a contradiction of the Masonic tradition, since Enoch was one of these children. That their inventions, says the historian, may not be lost before they were sufficiently known, upon Adam's prediction that the world was to be destroyed at one time by the force of fire, and at another time by the violence and quantity of water, they made two pillars, the one of brick, the other of stone. They inscribed their discoveries on them both, and that in the case of the pillar of brick should be destroyed by the flood, the pillar of stone might remain and exhibit those discoveries to mankind, and inform them that there was another pillar of brick erected by them. Now this remains in the land of Syria to this day. All knowledge of this temple and the sacred treasure it contained was lost until in after times it was accidentally discovered by another worthy of Freemasonry, who, like Enoch, was engaged in the erection of a temple on the same spot. This legend may have inspired the initiators of the Templars to excavate under the Temple of Solomon, where they presumably found something that led to great wealth and arcane knowledge. It is probably for this reason they eventually formed themselves into a secret order to protect whatever treasures they discovered. Knight and Lomas speculate that it was the Jerusalem high priests who survived the second destruction of the temple in 17 CE. They gave rise to the great families of Europe who, 1,000 years later, formed the Order of the Knights Templar. This is a moot point, as most of the population, some say high as 98% of the inhabitants of Jerusalem, were massacred and the rest carried off into captivity by the Romans. However, even this story does not give full details, because Jerusalem had been destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar 600 years earlier in 587 BCE, and the house of Judah taken into captivity in Babylon. The house of Israel had already been carried off into captivity by the Assyrians, never to be heard of again in traditional history. Steve Bergstrom claims it was from Constantinople the rabbis took their teachings in the form of the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, also called the Pentateuch or Book of the Law, and the Talmud, Jewish Book of Traditions or Instructions, to a pagan country where they found an oasis of tolerance for their religion and race. This was a little heard of country called Khazaria, where they eventually converted the kings Bulan and Obadiah, it being a Jew monarchy. It is said that most of the population of this historically obscure country emulated the royal families and converted to Judaism. In reality, Talmudism, see Bergstrom's Strategic Wealth, to make Khazaria the first truly Jewish homeland after the diaspora. These Eastern European Jews are known as Ashkenazi, which broadly means German. The conventional story of how the Khazars converted to Judaism relates how their king, Bulan, sent for representatives of the 3 great religions, and after much discussion found the Jewish argument most compelling and converted to that religion. However, according to Israeli journalist and commentator on Jewish affairs, Joel Binerman, the Khazar kings may have known their ancestors were Israelis. He presents a convincing argument, partly based on a book by David Dankenbring, that the story here may not be that the Khazars chose Judaism rather than that the other 2 monotheistic religions, but rather the Khazars' leadership believed themselves to be Jews, Israelis which were cut off from the rest of the mainline Jewish community centuries before. Bainerman uses this quote from Dankenbring's book to reinforce his argument. The Khazar kingdom was located in the region where the northern 10 tribes of Israel migrated and eventually settled after taken into captivity by the Assyrian Empire in 718-721 BCE. During the time following the release from the Assyrian captivity, with the conquest of Persia and Babylon by Alexander the Great in 331 BCE, the Israelis blossomed and grew strong, but they had lost their knowledge and of the religious and ethnic identification during the 1400 years spent in the steppes of Asia prior to the kingdom of the Khazars. They had lost the Torah, gone into Baal pagan note or bell worship, and appeared just like the Gentile cultures around them. They had departed from the laws and commandments of God and lost their religion and spiritual identification, marking their heritage. The former borders of Khazaria can be found on a modern map by following the Danube and Don rivers. The importance of emphasized words will be shown later. And the Black and Caspian Seas. This includes most of southern Russia. Coincidentally, this is the same region, Scythia, where the Scots race originated. In the 6th century AD, the anonymous chronograph of Ravenna, in its brief description of the Khazars as one of the major peoples inhabiting Scythia, specifies that in ancient times they were called Akatsirs. In that part which the philosophers called Europe the fatherland of Eaphet, Noah's son was located, i.e. the fatherland named Scythia, which is a wasteland or abandoned land. This fatherland was located along the coast of the Northern Ocean by the mentioned before Remphian mountains and was very big by width and length, also in a place flat, too spacious in length and width, the so-called Khazaria, which was constantly called the Big Scythia. Khazaria is one of interest to us because it was an area that the Scots-Irish, Scythians, the 10 lost tribes of Israel and the Ashkenazi East European Jews had at one time or another all inhabited. H. Ben Sasson confirms this, citing a late Byzantine tradition, speaks of the banishment of Jewish captives to Hyrcania near the Caspian Sea. He describes how these lost 10 tribes of the northern house of Israel found sanctuary in the same area. During this period, for the first time in Jewish history, the people were subjected to two cataclysmic phenomena, destruction and exile. The destruction and exile of the 10 tribes of Israel by Assyria, the destruction and exile of Judah by Babylonia. Some of the Israeli captives were taken by the Assyrians. Dynastic marriages between the Scythians and Assyrians were not uncommon to a province called Samaria. Another characteristic of this period was the close ties that developed between the families of the high priest, leading nobles and officials in Jerusalem and the leading families in Samaria. They later regarded themselves as belonging to Israel, and though excluded from the participation of the rebuilding of the altar in the days of Cyrus, they now became an influential and, indeed, decisive force in Jerusalem. The religious and cultural differences no longer seem significant. The nobility in Samaria accepted Jerusalem and the temple as a religious centre and, it would seem, recognized the authority of the high priest in Jerusalem in all matters affecting worship and religious leadership. The Samarians invaded Scythia in the latter half of the 3rd century BCE. This being so, it completes another small part of our puzzle, because as seen above, we can now identify the lost Israeli tribes intermingling with the Scythians, or were they the same race, on their way home. This return journey is explored. So here's a map here of Khazaria. Bulgars just above it. That's Bulgaria. There's Georgia down there. There's the Caucasus Mountains. So it's sort of, it looks like the Stans area, Kazakhstan and the places. Oh, there we go. The places are down there. Azerbaijan, Shirawan, Tabaristan. So here's another map here of the Scythians beside the Black Sea. Arthur Koestler caused a storm when he dragged the Khazars out of their historical darkness. He describes them as a remarkable people. Koestler, quoting an Arab chronicler, reports, "They are to the north of the inhabited earth towards the 7th clime, having over their heads the constellation of the plough. The land is cold and wet. Accordingly, their complexions are white, their eyes blue, their hair flowing and predominantly reddish, their bodies large, and their natures cold. Their general aspect is wild." Dankenbring adds to this. These people certainly do not sound like or look like Turkish race. White-skinned with blue eyes, red hair. If anything, these people sound like the Scots or Anglo-Saxons, that is, Western European, in their physiognomy and general features. It is my conjecture, which will hopefully form the foundation for a follow-up book, that is from the land of the Khazars, previously Scythia, that the nobility of the lost tribes of Israel, not necessarily Jews as we know them today, Israelis of the house of Judah, emerged to form the great houses of Europe and founded most of the neo-secret societies, including one of the conspiracy theorists' favourites, the Illuminati, as well as the mysterious Priory of Sion. In the meantime, a clue to this theory is that because Khazaria was strategically situated at the crossroad between east and west along the old Silk Road, they had become accomplished traders and, it is assumed, money changers, merchant bankers, as well as fierce fighters. This could explain the strong ties between Scotland, Ireland and the Templars, and answers the question why it was Scotland the Templars fled with their treasures, that one day may be found at Rosslyn Chapel, and in an Irish town they modelled in their own image, Drogheda. After the supposed destruction in 1307 by the French king, Philip the Fair, future research will show connections between Ireland and the Templars than has ever been revealed before. Once again we discover our world is not what we thought it was. Khazaria mysteriously disappears about the 11th century and for some identified motivation has been erased from conventional history books, and it is certainly not on the curriculum of any school. We will leave our exploration of it with the following letter to a Dr. David Goldstein by writer-researcher Benjamin H. Friedman, 1954, which will provide some insight into the importance of some mysterious power he assigns to Khazaria and prove once again how history is controlled. Maybe you can explain to me, my dear Dr. Goldstein, the reason why and just how the origin and history of the Khazars and the Khazar kingdom was so well concealed from the world for so many centuries. What secret mysterious power has been able for countless generations to keep the origin and the history of the Khazars and the Khazar kingdom out of the history textbooks and out of classroom courses in history throughout the world? The origin and history of the Khazars and Khazar kingdom are certainly incontestable historical facts. These incontestable historical facts also establish beyond any question of doubt the origin and history of the so-called self-styled Jews in Eastern Europe, the origin and history of the Khazars and the Khazar kingdom, and the relationship to the origin and early history of the so-called or self-styled Jews in Eastern Europe was one of history's best kept secrets until wide publicity was given in recent years to my research on this subject. Do you not think, my dear Dr. Goldstein, that it is time that the whole subject was dragged out of its hiding place? In the year 1948, in the Pentagon in Washington, I addressed a large assembly of the highest-ranking officers of the United States Army, principally in the G2 branch of the military intelligence, on the highly explosive geopolitical situation in Eastern Europe and the Middle East. Then, as now, that area of the world was a potential threat to the peace of the world and to the security of this nation. I explained to them fully the origin of the Khazars and the Khazar kingdom. I felt then, as I feel now, that without a clear and comprehensive knowledge of that subject, it is not possible to understand or to evaluate properly what has been taking place in the world since 1917, the year of the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. It is the key to that problem. Revisiting our exploration of the Boyne community, we trust we have presented sufficient evidence, there is more to come, to validate our case for an advanced society living here at some time in the dark and distant past. We have surmised they knew exactly where their exodus would take them, or could it have been the hand of Providence that led them to the geological centre of the world. It was here they honoured their ancestors and demonstrated their extensive knowledge by building the magnificent pyramids at Giza. The topography of Giza and Boyne escort us on our way to another series of coincidences. For example, by placing a sky map of the Milky Way, the great celestial river, as observed from the Earth, and looking at the northern sky, over a relief map of the Boyne River, we discover a similarity in their profiles. See illustration. This striking example, when we take a step further, shows the bend of the Boyne and a particular bend on the Nile are the almost perfect match, and they both boast so-called royal burial grounds on their banks called Valleys of the Kings. To conceptualise this statement, the word Nile, according to Conor McDarry, is Irish, being the genitive of fuel, blood. Inflected, the word becomes Newell, hence Nile. Other parallels between these two great rivers are met in the Egyptian myth of the crossing of the great celestial river. The Egyptian myth portrayed Horus ritualistically crossing the Nile to reach Duat in Egypt, the place where the righteous reside when they die, to meet with Osiris and to be initiated into kingship. Hereafter, all pharaohs, when they engaged in the ceremony, become known as Horus kings or followers of Horus. It should be noted that before making this journey, Horus defeated Seth, or Set, his uncle, echoes of what William had to do during a similar ritual performed thousands of years later at Imwan. In keeping with the ancient Egyptians' view of the relationship of sky to earth, both rituals are played out against the backdrop of a celestial drama, Osiris being reflected by the constellation of Orion and Horus the sun. We will discover these twin journeys are so precise as to be almost eerie, and once again affirms the Hermetic axiom, as above, so below. There has to be, however, a clear answer as to how a solar ritual could possibly relate to a Christian William crossing the Boyne to fight the Christian James. Although there have been clues throughout our saga, this question is fully answered in the final chapter. The priestly scientists of Brú na Boinne, in common with the priest scientists of ancient Egypt, possessed knowledge that included precise observations and measurements of the planets. They naturally bestowed great importance to the sun, but not necessarily the sun we know today, which may give us a clue as... So, what's this? A comparison of the course of the Boyne with that of the Milky Way. Coincidence? It probably is, Pete Shea. I don't know what... The comparison of the course of the Boyne with that of the Milky Way. What is it we're seeing here? Was it the major stars in the Milky Way and these black dots? What is it? I don't know what we're trying to see here. Anyway, the Boyne is pretty similar to the Nile, I suppose. That bend anyway. But we all know the Nile comes down the way, so they've skewed it. Maybe he just wants to see what he wants to see to support his theory. To the nature of the catastrophe that devastated this mysterious community, Jordan Maxwell argues that the sun they perceived at the time was not our contemporary sun, but another star, or perhaps a binary star system. This, of course, was before the Great Catastrophe. No matter, they were obviously aware of the necessity of the energy found within the sun to sustain life on Earth. This was reflected in their religion and system of laws, which in turn were based on their observations of the movements of the stars and planets. Today, we dismiss out of the hand their knowledge and their methods of articulating it as a religious myths. An important point to note here is that they did not worship the sun as God. It was only in later epochs the sun was revered as a god because ancient teachings were misinterpreted. The Ewan sages regarded the sun as a manifestation of, or directly created by, a mysterious divine force in the universe, hence the appellation of the sun god, Son of God. Albert Pike, in his 19th century magnum opus Dogma and Morals, refers to this when he said that the sun was the ancient symbol of the life-giving and generative power of deity, and continues, thousands of years ago men worshipped the sun. Originally they looked beyond the orb to the invisible God. This concept of a power behind the sun was rediscovered with the public phase of the mystery schools that began in the 18th dynasty, as will be revealed when the life of Akhenaten, the great Aryan pharaoh, and his links to Brú na Boinne are examined. The closest the anthropologists have come to labelling these mysterious people is by giving them the title the Grooved Ware people, so called because of the designs that they made on their pottery. Most researchers remain unconvinced this was the name of the race that constructed the Boyne monument and the Egyptian pyramids. Gerald Massey, in his volume A Book of the Beginnings, speculates that it was the two Danann, a people revered as gods in Irish mythology, who were the mystery architects and builders. Commons Bowman identifies them as the Cimmerians. Lomas and Knight cogitate the Grooved Ware people may have been the biblical watchers referred to in the Book of Enoch. Enoch, Henoch in Hebrew, which signifies to initiate and instruct, and seems intended to express the fact he was the first to give a decisive character to the rite of initiation, was a name that kept cropping up in this part of my researches, so a little more information about him might be useful to us. He was a pre-flood patriarch closely connected with the early history of what we now call Freemasonry and to the Newgrange builders. Peter Dawkins puts forward the notion that he was the king of Arcadia. The Phoenix King is the Atlas, alias Enoch, the Master of Masters, from whom all our wisdom teachings derive. He was also, according to the Bible and Masonic records, a direct descendant of Adam. Seventh of the patriarchs, son of Jared and the great-grandfather of Noah, Greek Christians supposed him to have been identical with the first Egyptian Hermes, who dwelt at Sais. They say he was the first to give instruction on the celestial bodies, that he foretold the deluge that was to overwhelm his descendants, that he built the pyramids, engraved thereon figures of artificial instruments and elements of sciences, fearing lest the memory of man should perish in that general destruction. It is interesting to note that the years of Enoch's life before he was taken off the earth were 365, the number of days in the solar year. Knight and Lomas theorise in their book Uriel's Machine that he was brought to Boyne by an angel called Uriel. There he was taught astronomical matters. Strangely, it was Donarcad O'Carroll, king of Uriel, who co-founded Mellifont Abbey, the earliest Cistercian monastery in Ireland, in 1140-42, on the advice of St Malachy, who had been impressed by St Bernard's monastery at Clairvaux. St Bernard was, of course, the spiritual mentor to the Templars. Everything connects. We have already seen that the Masons believed Enoch foretold the flood, in which his great-grandson Noah was a principal character, and Knight and Lomas say he was instructed in astrology with the purpose of protecting this knowledge so that it would be available after the coming catastrophe. The Book of Enoch highlights this in the section called the Book of the Courses of the Heavenly Luminaries, which these revealing verses show how the world could be after the catastrophe. And in the days of the sinners the years shall be shortened, and their seed shall be tardy on their lands and fields, and all things on the earth shall alter, and shall not appear in their time, and the rain shall be kept back, and the heaven shall withhold it. And in those times the fruit of the earth shall be backward, and shall not grow in their time, and the fruits of the tree shall be withheld in their time, and the moon shall alter her order, and not appear at her time. And in those days the sun shall be seen, and he shall journey in the evening on the extremity of the great chariot of the west, and shall shine more brightly than accords with the order of light. And many chiefs of the stars shall transgress the order, and these shall alter their orbits and tasks, and not appear at the season prescribed to them. And the whole order of the stars shall be concealed from the sinners, and the thoughts of those on the earth shall err concerning them, and they shall be altered from all their ways. Yea, they shall err and take them to the gods, and take them to be gods. And shall evil be multiplied upon them, and punishment shall come upon them, so as to destroy all. However, it is not their name that is of importance to us, but their travels, their knowledge, how their race was renewed after almost being wiped out, and how they preserved their knowledge for for future humanity that is our primary study. The sages of this nation showed a deep appreciation of how important ritual and symbolism was in teaching. They understood that knowledge was absorbed, easier if taught using the twin-track approach. The philosopher and mystic P.D. Ouspensky concurs. In the ancient times before philosophy, religion, and art had taken their separate forms as we know them, psychology had existed in the form of the mysteries, such as those of Egypt and ancient Greece. Later, after the disappearance of the mysteries, psychology existed in the form of symbolical teachings, which were sometimes connected with the religion of the period and sometimes not connected, such as astrology, alchemy, magic, and the more modern masonry, occultism, and theosophy. This ancient method of teaching, which nowadays has largely become a mechanism for control through the manipulation of archetypal symbols in our subconscious, it is still in use but to limited degree within the privacy of the mystery schools. Paradoxically, the manipulation is so commonplace and insidious that we are not conscious of it in our lives. If you think this is a bit overdramatic, consider this. In a consultation paper on the New World Order, St George's House, Windsor Castle, a think tank issued a paper called Report of a House Consultation, March the 4th, 2002. One of its paragraph headings states, "We kill each other because of our symbols clash." A participant elaborates, "Look, we kill each other not because of the lack of the rule of law, but because our symbols clash with yours." How true this is in the context of today's troubled world, and especially from the point of view of this story and how it applies to Ireland, the cradle of Western civilization. The Bruna Boyne Dons knew their methods were the most effective way to impart to their students the sacred knowledge they cosseted so lovingly. Students were instructed, using Newgrange as a virtual model, how the seed carried by the rays of the sun of the male or positive principle enters the womb through the vulva, roof box, or Mother Earth, the female, or negative mothering principle, and impregnates her with the seed of life. As an illustration and to help us better understand the mindset of the inhabitants, let us journey back in imagination to Enoch, as it might have been a couple of thousand years ago. In a twinkling of an eye, we are transported to a grassy knoll in front of Newgrange. A story. It is a clear, crisp, midwinter morning, just before sunrise. You find yourself with a group of people standing before a magnificent polished white structure. Noticing immediately an air of eager anticipation, you look around and note your companions are young, except for several striking-looking older men and women dressed in white. The young people, you realise, after you get your bearings, are neophytes or students, the older people sages, masters and teachers of cosmic and natural laws. After a few minutes of silent meditation, we are all instructed to follow the sages as they file into the chamber to be engulfed by the darkness. The only points of lights coming from the lamps that the sages carry, which don't seem to have any source, but which illuminate our path. Our group assembles within the chamber and waits in expectant silence to discover what happens next. After some time there is an impression that the chamber is becoming vaguely brighter. We notice on the floor the first rays of the sun as it creeps slowly into the chamber. The student begins to comprehend by experiencing the dynamic laws of the cosmic for the first time. Something until now they had only understood in an abstract sense. Watching as the sun steadily continues its intrusion into the chamber, we observe it cross the first of the three basin-like structures lined up in the chamber. The first one is plain stone, having nothing carved on it, and which the sun inches across to fall upon the second basin. You see there are two indentations on this one, into which have been embedded two perfectly formed crystals. The moment the rays of the sun strike the crystals, the chamber bursts into life as a rainbow of coloured light shoots skyward. These could be what John of Fordham refers to as hexagon stones, which being held up to the sun forms rainbow in the air. We then realise experientially that this is how the conscious of the cosmic manifests itself in the dimension. The rays of the sun continue on to illuminate the final basin, which seems to be broken, but we recognize that this completes the beginning of the conceptual cycle and is not broken, but demonstrates how the embryonic cells multiply. We stand in shocked amazement, marveling at the skill required to have constructed this matrix. If you have a good imagination, you should now experience a feeling of an intimacy with your source, that is, the source of all manifestation, subjective and objective. This is how the students were taught that everything harmonizes and holds together through cosmic law, which is reflected in the mantra chanted by the initiate in Egypt. I, even I, know the laws of God, which are God. Standing in the chamber with fellow students, further instructions are received about the laws of the universe uses to realize its own nature, which is by actualizing potential consciousness in the universe. This is accomplished and symbolized by the fertilization of the womb, the earth, as we have just witnessed, an act that ultimately manifests a living soul. See in your mind's eye the rays of the sun slowly retreat along the birth canal, and your class moves solemnly out of the womb into bright sunlight. Our group reassembles outside the chamber. We join them and wait eagerly for the next stage of our initiation into the mysteries. We are allowed time to catch our breath and adjust to the profound feelings that we were invoked. Feelings we didn't know even existed before we went into the womb, Newgrange. One of the elders begins to narrate how one of the race, known as the Elohim, or Iliam, more about this name later, called Uriel, warned the great sage Enoch of a catastrophe that was approaching Earth in the form of a meteor, but not for this Enoch's generation, but for a remote one, which is far to come. Our instructor relates how this looming disaster would bring about a great flood because it would disturb the waters above the earth and cause them to fall. And God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which are above the firmament, and it was so. Enoch, we are told, because he walked with God, was chosen to be the guardian of the sacred teachings, which he was to pass on to his descendants to equip future generations with the knowledge that they would need to survive before he was lifted off the earth. He was instructed in the building of an ark, as well as a boat. The word ark can simply mean a place of shelter or refuge that would ensure survival of at least some of the descendants. This instruction he passed on to his son, Methuselah, who in turn gave it to his son, Lamech, and finally to Enoch's great-grandson, Noah. 1 year we will leave thee with thy son, till thou givest thy commands, that thou mayest teach thy children and record for them, and testify to all thy children. And in the 2nd year they shall take thee from their midst. And now, my son Methuselah, all these things I am recounting to thee, and writing down for thee, and I have revealed to thee everything, and given the books concerning all these. So preserve, my son Methuselah, the books from my father's hand, and that thou deliver them to the generations of the world. Sitting comfortably on the grass, as the rising sun warms us, we are totally absorbed in story. The sage continues. He conveys to us how one of our great patriarchs, Noah, built a magnificent ark that was to shelter and protect his family and many animals when the floods came. He took with him, we are told, 2 of every animal, for impracticality of taking the biblical story literally, see footnote. It is explained to us we are not to take this literally, but to understand when the ancient records say every sort of animal, what they are referring to are genes or DNA. Noah, along with his family, stayed in his ark until the waters assuaged. It rained, we all know, for 40 days and 40 nights, and the waters stayed upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. However, the number of 40 in mythologies means a perfect or complete time. Other references to this number in the Bible include the Israelis wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, Moses remaining on Mount Sinai for 40 days and 40 nights, and Jesus fasting for 40 days and 40 nights. After 40 days, Noah ventured forth to determine if the floods had subsided and it was safe for his family to come out. What he found was a dank, empty and unwelcoming world, where he could not tell if it was day or night. Our lecturer again quotes from the writings of Enoch, and in those days the sun shall be seen, and he shall journey in the evening, to emphasize the confusion and how the heavenly bodies appeared to the Noahites, being in different positions in the sky since they entered the ark. The sage, warming to his story, tells us about Noah's adventures as he, his family, and his family's descendants journey in search of warmth and light. He tells us of how they met other groups of survivors who were to become the parents that birthed the tribes, which, after many millennia, replenished the earth. It is explained to us how the sacred teachings were preserved and protected from the profane, because it was all too well known how this knowledge had been abused before the flood. A small group of enlightened souls, as original survivors began to multiply, were chosen for this task. This core group eventually developed the knowledge into systematic teachings and formed what we know today as mystery schools to dispense knowledge to those who, after proper preparation, were ready to receive it, the same reason that our group was here today. Instruction is given to those how the famous Egyptian mystery schools gave birth to the Golden Age, the apex of this particular system of teaching, but because of the ignorance and self-interest on the part of the dark priesthood, our ancestors fled Egypt to resume their wanderings. This time, however, they were determined to return to their ancient homeland and take their knowledge with them. In due course, they returned to the lands their ancestors had left thousands of years before. We gather from various writings of old chroniclers that the nations of the Scots, one of the most ancient descent, sprang from the Greeks and from the Egyptians who survived the overthrow of their fellow countrymen and king in the Red Sea. Our instructor, near the ends of his talk, before he does, he relates how on their return they found the mammoth edifice that had saved Noah and his family in a state of disrepair. He tells us of how they set to work to turn the ark, or what was left of it, into a memorial to the Noahites, and to preserve the memory of how humanity survived the great catastrophe. They remodeled the ark into a replica of a womb, which not only demonstrates how the human race was symbolically reborn after the devastation, but also showed the depth of knowledge and culture that this lost race had attained before the flood. He informs us how the massive stones, none weighing less than a ton, were transported to the site to be used in the building. This, we are told, could only have been carried by people who were many times taller than us. We are instructed to close our eyes, to engage in a period of meditation, and to ponder on all we have been instructed in. Will you join us? The results of our contemplations are: 1. The cairn at Newgrange, was the original ark, or possibly one of several built by this race. It was remodeled by the returning descendants into a virtual womb as a memorial to the rebirth of humanity after the catastrophe. Lomas and Knight rightly call it a birthing chamber. 2. We saw there were virtual models, commonly called basins, which demonstrate and depict precisely the fertility process inside the womb. 3. In the biblical story of the flood, we are told that animals went two and two. DNA is a quaternary system, a double helix. It is recognized by physicists as 4 letters, 2 of DNA and 2 of RNA. Today, the recipes for life, RNA and DNA, are normally written in a 4-letter molecular alphabet. The bases adenine, guanine, and cytosine, together with thymine, as DNA or uracil and RNA. Each gene in DNA is a sequence of A's, G's, C's and T's, hence 2 and 2. Continuing our theme that the biblical story of Noah is cryptic, the number 8 in many flood stories is probably the only constant. There were 8 people in the capsule. The 8 is the number of the female, as well as being the atomic number for oxygen. In his book Genesis, Dr. R. Woods explains the mythological significance of this number. The number of the body of the supreme goddess Isis, daughter of the spirit entity Nut, but born of flesh, symbolized by the entwined serpent double helix, form the double womb of infinity, the spiral lemniscate. The legend indicate that she is the most perfect of all creatures of animal flesh. She sustains life, and her number is also the atomic number of the element oxygen, an essential of any life process. When oxygen unites with hydrogen, water is formed, giving us 18, the number of our active principle. She is a goddess of 100 names, the most abundant, as oxygen is the most abundant element on earth. Another intriguing idea relates to the name Iona, which in Hebrew means dove. The Hebrew spelling of Iona is Ionah, an anagram for I, Noah. Iona is the island where the great Irish St. Columcille, meaning dove of the church, erected his first monastery, 565 CE. This could reinforce what Conor McDarry says about that there being little difference between Hebrew and Irish. Moreover, an idea that should be mentioned here is as follows. In the Christian Bible, Noah's Ark came to rest on Ararat, and the ark rested in the 7th month on the 17th day of the month upon the mountains of Ararat. Now if we spell Ararat backwards, we get Tarara or Tara-Ra. We should be mindful that Ra is of course the sun god. Tara can be interpreted in various ways, but one of them could have originally meant, according to Ulf Erlgrenson, Atlantis, map in the fairyland, holy place. Another interpretation is a place of great prospect. If we stick with Ulf's interpretation, Tara Ra gives us the holy place of Ra, the sun god, Newgrange. The place named Tara can, in my opinion, not only be applied to the hill of Tara, but can also be used to describe the whole Boyne valley, including Newgrange. Right, people, this is quite a long chapter, so I'm going to end it there and make a third part for this Bruna Boyne chapter. Anyway, people, thanks for listening in, and I will see you in the next part. Cheers.